What's up, Wizards? It's the D and the Z. We're a couple of SBMT OGs down there, and we got some weekend Kaldheim previews for you today, baby. There's a lot of good stuff to go over, too, so I don't want to waste too much time. Just remember to like and subscribe, do all that stuff, and let's go ahead and get to these cards. But let's start by looking at some of the lower rarity stuff from Sunday, like Haggy Mob, and a reprint, a null. Pretty good reprint, too, or at least it has a reputation for being decent. Back in the day, when this was first printed into Urza's block, there were a lot of very good artifacts and some really good enchantments, like the Replenish deck that was going around. So you had to respect the null because it's just 1 mana to counter an artifact or enchantment. Nowadays, I think Negate is probably the better sideboard option, all things considered. So I'm not sure how good a null's going to be nowadays. It's been reprinted a few times since Urza's block, and it's never really lived up to its reputation. I don't really see that changing with this iteration of a null. It might be at least decent as a sideboard option in limited, but in standard, I just think Negate is much, much better in most cases. But we'll move on to Haggy Mob. This is 5 mana, 4 and a red for a 5/4 Troll Berserker with Boast. 1 and a red. Haggy Mob deals 1 damage to any target, but remember, you can only boast if the creature attacked this turn, and you can only do it once each turn. So what this is going to do a lot of the time in limited, I would imagine at least, is it's going to swing in, and before creatures get a chance to block, it just mows down like an X1, small creature or whatever. So this is kind of removal in a way, as long as you're only removing small creatures, and that can be pretty decent in combat. Plus, a couple of boasts to the face, and you might just finish the game. This is a form of reach if you've been able to deal enough damage to your opponent that game. A couple of boasts might actually just finish them entirely, so it's got decent enough toughness that it probably survives its combat step and lives to boast another day, but if it doesn't, it at least trades with something pretty big on the other side of the table. So, all things considered, I kind of like this in limited, but I probably wouldn't play more than a copy or two. We also got to see a couple of cool new Changeling commons. Not too much to get super impressed by here, but at least worth mentioning Guardian Gladewalker and Litjara Kinseekers. Guardian Gladewalker is just 2 mana for a 1/1 Changeling. When it ETBs, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Not too much to write home about, but at least, hey, it's something. And Litjara Kinseekers is 4 mana, 3 and a blue for a 2/4 Shapeshifter with Changeling. And when it ETBs, if you control 3 or more creatures that share a creature type, you put a +1/+1 counter on Kinseekers and you scry 1. Probably slightly better for limited. It is a 4-drop, so it's more expensive, but sometimes you'll get a 3/5 for 4 mana that also scries, and that's pretty decent. It shouldn't be too hard to hit 3 different creatures with creature types that are the same, because you've got shapeshifters, and obviously you've got so many shapeshifters at the common rarity in this limited environment. It really shouldn't be difficult to hit this condition. So I kind of like that, especially in sealed where the scry matters, and a 3/5 body is really, really good on the ground. But again, this is another card I probably wouldn't play more than like 1 copy of. But moving on to more Changeling stuff, we also got to see Bloodline Pretender in the uncommon slot today. This is just 3 mana for a 2/2 shapeshifter with Changeling that's kind of a reverse Metallic Mimic in a way. As it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. And whenever another creature of the chosen type enters the battlefield under your control, Pretender gets a +1/+1 counter rather than that creature. So, again, reverse Mimic here. It just gets really, really big as time goes on. You put this in Elves, you just have like a 9/9 by the time the next turn ends or whatever. It could happen, but altogether, I don't think this is going to be powerful enough to see too much play in just about any format. As far as the cool Changeling card of the day, the best one by far, here's Moritae, or Moritae of the Frost. This is 5 mana, 2 a green and 2 blue for a 0/0 legendary snow shapeshifter with Changeling, and you may have it ETB as a copy of a permanent you control, except it's legendary and snow in addition to its other types. And if it's a creature, it enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it and has Changelings. There's a whole bunch of ands on this card, but just to clear something up, you cannot copy a legendary thing. You can if you want to, but you'll have to sacrifice one of them. There's just so much you can do with it that I imagine, like most Simic commander decks, this may find a home in depending on what tricks that Simic player is trying to pull off. So it's just so versatile. And you can do so much with it. And obviously, especially in Commander, this is a singleton format. Same thing with Brawl and whatnot. So I imagine that the most powerful cards in your deck, you'd really like to have an extra copy of those. And there are already Simic decks in Commander that are effectively just clone decks, and this slots directly in. So I imagine this is more of a Commander card than a Standard card, but that doesn't mean there's not a lot of powerful stuff you can do in Standard with it. Just 5 mana to copy an Elder Gargaroth or something gives you like an 8/8 Elder Gargaroth and a second Gargaroth for what that's worth. I mean, there's a lot of really cool stuff you can copy in Standard. Just creatures you can copy, but there's a ton of cool artifacts and enchantments I'd like to copy too. Ooh, copying enchantments, that's a thing to do. See, I'm just telling you. There's just so much you can do with this card. I'd be surprised if it didn't show up in Commander until the end of time, but I would also not be surprised if somebody found something tricky to do with it in Standard. Well, let's move on to the last couple of low rarity cards from Sunday, but these, I think, are a cut above the rest, all things considered. Kaya's Onslaught and the new Blossoming Defense, Snakeskin Veil. This is just 1 green mana for an instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains hexproof until end of turn. That's incredible. Like, this could actually be better than Blossoming Defense. The creature gets the boost permanently, which is very good. I mean, it's just a strictly better Ranger's Guile, too, so at least there's that. But all things considered, I think this might actually see some amount of play, either in Standard or Historic or whatever, because this is a really, really good Protect Your Dude spell that leaves it permanently bigger. Like in green-white counters, it's effectively an upgraded Blossoming Defense if you have like a Conclave Mentor on the table, and I'm pretty sure I've mentioned Conclave Mentor in every single spoiler video so far this season, but this is just another really good card for that deck because it protects your Conclave Mentor, or your Orin Refuse, or your Luminarch Aspirant, or whatever you're doing at the time. It'll protect your most important creatures, which is something that deck needs access to. So I really, really like the card a lot, and probably the best uncommon, or the best common of the day, pretty easily. But moving on to maybe the best uncommon of the day, if you don't count the cool Commander inclusion we just saw, is Kaya's Onslaught. This is 2 and a white for an instant. Target creature gets +1/+1 and gains double strike until end of turn. You can foretell it for just a white mana, but of course, altogether, you're paying the same rate for it. You're paying a total of 3 mana to foretell this and then cast it for its foretell cost. So I will say, though, that just 1 mana for a better Temur Battle Rage, I mean to say, I'll eventually get it out, is really good. It's actually fantastic in a lot of ways. Even if you do have to foretell it on an earlier turn to get it for that 1 mana cost, there's going to be a lot of times, though, where you don't mind paying the full 3 mana for it. It's a little bit later in the game. You didn't do anything before your combat step. You just swung straight in, and you got all your mana open, so Temur Battle Rage looks pretty good when you've got like a Maul of the Skyclaves on a Seasoned Hallowblade or something, and suddenly you just get in for, God, what, 12 in that situation? It seems pretty crazy to me. So I actually really like this card, and I'm not sure how much play it ultimately sees, but obviously these Temur Battle Rage effects are pretty nice, and we even see some of like the blue-red Sprite Dragon decks playing Raking Claws as like a 1 or 2 of. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if this showed up in some aggro deck or another as just a way to win the game out of nowhere. But let's get to the rares from Sunday, and then we'll finish off the video with some of the best cards from Saturday. Now, I want to start with Faceless Haven. This is a snow land that taps to add a colorless, or you can pay 3 snow. Doesn't matter what color, remember, in case you're not used to snow. Snow isn't a color or anything. It's not like tapping wastes for mana. It's just any snow mana whatsoever that you have laying around, no matter what color it is. You can pay 3 of that to have Faceless Haven become a 4/3 creature with Vigilance, and has all creature types until end of turn. It's still a land. I actually don't like this as much as some people like it. Now, I do think we're inching closer to a format where you can play a bunch of creature lands, and I've always wanted that. We have Crawling Barrens and this card in Standard now, but I think Crawling Barrens is just a better card in a lot of situations. It really depends on how often you can consistently have 3 snow mana, and how much that is going to make you tamper with your mana base in a negative way, a way that negatively affects your deck. Just in order to get this card. I really wish I could be more excited about this, I guess. This is my take on this, because I, again, don't want to contort a mana base in such a way that it has a definite negative impact on what I can do consistently in my deck, and just to get this effect. But let's take a look at Maskwood Nexus next. This is 4 mana for an artifact. Creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield, the Arcane Adaptation text. And you can pay 3 and tap it, create a 2/2 blue shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. So it is a literal creature factory, and you know I usually really like these. 4 mana is a little bit steep, and you can't activate it till the next turn, and if you do activate it next turn, it takes just about all of your mana. So, you know, I got some issues with this, but obviously I imagine most, you know, tribal commander decks are going to probably work in at least one copy of this card, like no matter what tribe that they're in, you know, unless they're incredibly aggressive and they just don't have all the mana in the world for this. Well, even then, I mean, you have to beat like 3 other players at least at the table, if not 7 other players at the table. So, you know, you probably will work in these long game strategies like this to go along with any other creature factories you have access to. I just really like this card. I'm not sure that it does much of anything in standard unless, again, it goes in a control deck, because this, my friends, is yet another just win condition that costs any color of mana to cast. You know, you do have to pay 4 mana on your turn to get it down. Control decks don't necessarily want to do that. They might have access to better finishers than this, but once you do take control of the board state, instant speed, pay 3 mana, make a 2/2 is actually not the worst win condition in the world. So, again, I think they probably have access to better ways of closing games and faster ways of closing games, but I'm still kind of interested. I really am. But still, I'll move on from this card. Congratulations, Commander players. That seems very good in your Tribal Commander deck, almost no matter what tribe you're playing. But we'll move on to, I guess we'll talk about Eradicator Valkyrie, because this is another card that I should be impressed by. It's even mythic and all that, but I got some issues. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 black for a 4/3 Angel Berserker with flying, lifelink, and hexproof from Planeswalkers. You can boast, that's 1 and a black, sacrifice a creature. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or Planeswalker. I think Rankle is probably a better card than this. Right? I mean, Rankle costs the exact same mana cost. It does have 1 point less of power. It doesn't have the lifelink, but it does make up for that by having haste. You don't have to pay to make your opponent sack stuff. You can make your opponent do more things than just sack creatures, right? Or Planeswalkers, for that matter. I will say Rankle can't make your opponent sack a Planeswalker. This can make your opponent sack an Ugin, and your opponent can't bolt it with their Ugin. But sadly, your opponent can -4 their Ugin and take this out, because hexproof doesn't deal with not targeted stuff, so keep that in mind. I mean, maybe it's to protect against Ugins, but it still dies to Ugin 9 times out of 10. So I'm just not too sure about it. You know, as far as 4 mana 4/3 flyers, I don't love that stat line at all. I'd much rather have the 3/3 haste that's guaranteed to get in for at least one of its triggers, or at least much more guaranteed to get in for one of its triggers than this is. You have to wait a whole turn, and you have to pay mana for the boast trigger. And Sackitude, I don't know, guys. I don't really rightfully know why this card is mythic. Because I really don't see, you know, I could see it taking over a game, but we definitely have way better options in Standard at the moment than this card, or at least way better option. That's all it takes, is one better option for this card to never see play. I guess it's not legendary. So that's good. But again, I don't see it taking Rankle's place anytime soon. But let's move on to a card that kind of does impress me, even though I'm pretty sure it shouldn't, and that's Draugr Necromancer. This is 4 mana, 3 and a black for a 4/4 snow zombie cleric. And if a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile that card with an ice counter on it instead. You may cast spells from among cards and exile your opponent's own with ice counters on them, and you may spend mana from snow sources as though it were mana of any colors to cast those spells. Okay, so the things I don't like about it first, and it's all the same stuff that I tend to say about cards, right? It costs a little bit too much for what it is, and more importantly, it doesn't do anything the turn it enters the battlefield. You have to wait a whole turn, and you have to have cards or the board state to support the card. You have to have kill spells in your hand, or you have to be able to like force bad blocks on your opponent or something, and none of this is guaranteed. So the card is probably bad. Like, looking at it from a sober perspective, you know, be analytical, be critical about the things you're looking at. That's not necessarily the best Magic card, but let's go. If you untap with it on the table and you have a Heartless Act in hand, or you have the kind of board state that, again, you can swing into your opponent and force them to block, or else they die or whatever, but they'll lose a creature or two, then this actually starts looking really, really good. If you untap with this on the table, just Heartless Act one of their creatures, you can probably play whatever you killed that turn. You know, you don't actually need too much snow mana to make this card work. It looks like it's intensive on snow mana, but it's not. You may spend snow mana of any color to play, or as though or mana of any color to play those spells. Now, what it doesn't say, but is nonetheless true, is that you can pay like generic mana costs on those spells with any color of mana. It doesn't have to be snow, it can be non-snow, it really doesn't matter. So all you really have to do is pay the colored cost with snow mana. So if you have like 1 or 2 snow mana laying around, you should be able to cast whatever you end up exiling. It is also very much worth noting, this is a big one, that as long as this is on the table, if you kill your opponent's stuff, you're exiling it. That's good. Even if you never play the stuff, you never get a chance to play it, you've still exiled creatures that they would otherwise be able to, you know, reanimate, or maybe the creatures have dice triggers of some kind. So just that line of text. Whenever you kill something on your opponent's side of the table, it's gone forever. That's pretty nice. You know, they can't escape the thing ever again, and you have access to it. Also worth noting, there's a lot of like cool stuff about this card. Also worth noting that let's say you play this and you exile a couple of your opponent's creatures, but you're not able to cast them out of exile before you lose this guy. Well, if you play another copy of this dude a little bit later on down the line, well, you suddenly gain access to all the creatures that you exiled earlier in the game, because now this text applies again. They're still exiled with ice counters on them, so it doesn't matter if you have a different copy of it in play, you can still play those cards. And so that's kind of nice. It works somewhat well in multiples. If you end up losing 1 or 2 of them, drawing that third copy is going to be nice. So I like a lot about this card, way more than I should. It kind of combines sort of well with Blood on the Snow. You want to look at that? Because you can just, you know, you can Blood on the Snow for 4 mana, you know, for 4 snow. And then bring this back immediately from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then suddenly you have access to like all the stuff you exiled from your opponent's graveyard, or from your opponent's side of the table. So just really, there's some cool stuff with this card. It's got to stick around, but your opponent's going to be instantly insanely afraid of it. It is a must remove permanent as soon as it hits the table. So there's some things I like about it. There are some, I don't know, could be pretty good, could be good, but it's probably bad. Like I said, we're going to finish off here with some of the best cards from Saturday. But if you want all the spoiler discussion from Saturday, go to twitch.tv/SBMTGDev and look at my latest VOD. We talked about all of the spoilers from Saturday, and we had a really good time doing it too. We went into some really in-depth discussions. So if you're into seeing just about every single card from Saturday, talked about at length, then go over to my Twitch channel and check out the latest VOD. But let's talk about some of the best cards from Saturday, because a lot of you haven't really gotten a chance to hear me talk about those cards. Has my microphone been in the shot this whole time? Let me push that back slightly. Sorry about that. Anyway, let's talk about Saw It Coming first, because it's probably the most talked about card of the entire weekend. So on the one hand, it's just a cancel, right? 3 mana, 2 of it's blue, it counters a spell. We've seen this a million times, kind of boring. However, you can also foretell this and then cast it out of exile for 1 and a blue, meaning that as long as you've already foretold it, it's like a strictly better counter spell. Pretty good. It's causing, really causing some people to freak out in the community. Now, in my opinion, I don't think it's actually that crazy. Not so bad, but I think it's a good counter spell. Don't get me wrong, I think it's playable. I just don't necessarily think that the end is nigh or anything like that. Rather than being an extremely cheap early game counterspell, which is, by the way, the reason a 2-mana counterspell is so good, is because especially on the play, your opponent won't really be able to resolve much of anything. Even on the draw, your opponent won't be able to resolve really anything very good. So a 2-mana counterspell that's unconditional is probably too good for standard at the moment, but this is not that. This is a counterspell that will more likely make you, able to double spell during a given turn. You pay a little bit up front for it, and then once you've untapped again, you have 4, 5, 6 mana available to you, meaning you can counter 2 spells during their turn because this only costs 2 mana. You can counter a spell during their turn and then still cast like a card draw spell, EOT, counter a spell and still have the mana for removal when they try to cast Embercleave on a creature during their attack step. There's just all kinds of reasons why control players want to conserve their mana as much as possible and have as much open mana as they can on any given turn, and this allows for that. It allows for double and triple spelling more efficiently on the mid and late game, which I think is kind of fair. much more fair than having an early game counterspell, which is sort of what people are freaking out about, and that's not what this is. But probably my favorite card from the entire weekend is Quakebringer. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 red for a 5/4 giant berserker. Your opponents can't gain life. That's delicious gravy, but here's the good part. At the beginning of your upkeep, Quakebringer deals 2 damage to each opponent. This ability triggers only if Quakebringer is on the battlefield or if Quakebringer is in your graveyard and you control a giant. And you can foretell this for 2 and 2 red. Awesome. Really, really awesome. If you have nothing better to do on your turn 2 or 3, you might as well foretell this, throw it in exile. And then on turn 4, you get a big boy. You get a big old 5/4 boy on turn 4, which is nice. That curves pretty well into like Realm Cloak Giant for what that's worth. So, I don't know. I like a few things just about the stat line, even though a 5 mana 5/4 is obviously not an amazing magic card or anything, but it's got the right creature types. No, what I mostly like about this, apart from your opponents can't gain life, which is actually more relevant than you think it is, no matter what you're playing against. Like, playing against food, that's really relevant. Mono white life gain, that's really relevant. But there's a bunch of other decks that will just incidentally gain life. So that's not a terrible line of text right now. But no, it's that middle chunk, that paragraph of text right there. This is amazing reach, especially if you have multiple copies of it. That seems really, really good. You can even curve them into themselves. You know, foretell one on turn 3, cast it on turn 4, cast another one on turn 5. And at that point, that's real reach. If you've been able to do just about any other damage to your opponent in that game, dealing 2 or 4 a turn is nuts so. And if your opponent does take out your Quakebringer, they still have to exile it or get it out of your graveyard somehow, because as long as it's in your yard and you control any other giant, you're still popping them for 2 a turn. I don't know if y'all have played against Clothis lately, but getting popped for 2 a turn is actually really, really annoying and ends games by itself, and that's legendary. You can have multiple copies of this either out or in your graveyard at any time. You know, if you play one, your opponent kills it, it might still be hitting them. You draw into another one, not only does your opponent have to deal with a 5/4, but if they kill that one, suddenly they're taking 4 damage a turn before you've even drawn your card for the turn. That seems crazy. And yes, just like I discussed on Twitch, I want to build a deck that effectively just mills itself and puts 4 copies of this into its graveyard and just has a couple of other giants it can keep on the battlefield to make sure the ability procs. You know, if you have all 4 copies of this in your yard, you're dealing 8 a turn. So, you know, a couple of stomps from Bone Crusher Giants and you finish the game off in a turn or 2. It seems pretty good to me. So, and it's pretty good counterplay against rogues too, because rogues will mill this into your graveyard. If you have any other giants, suddenly they're taking 4, 6 a turn, depending on how much they've milled. So, I don't know, guys. I think they're making giants a real, actual tribe this time around, and I cannot wait to get my hands on this card. It's awesome when it's in play. It's awesome after they kill it. It's awesome in multiples. It's awesome in multiples after they kill both of them. Your opponent has dealt with 2 5/4s this game, but they haven't fully dealt with them because they're still getting hit from them from beyond the grave. It's just this is a cool card that I like for a lot of reasons, whether it's janky, Johnny combo reasons. I want to put all of these in my graveyard on turn 3 and just start proccing them all the time, or just because it's a really solid, this is an actually very solid card that has relevance whether it's on the battlefield or not. I'm always going to like it. One of my favorite cards revealed so far. But that is it for today, at least. Again, remember, if you want to see every single card that was previewed on Saturday, talked about at great length, go over to twitch.tv/SBMTGDev. You can check out that VOD for yourself. We have a lot of fun over there on Twitch, so give me a follow while you're over there. It costs you nothing to follow me on Twitch. But while you're here, you might as well like and subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications. Lots of spoilers coming out. Trying to get to 120K subscribers still, so help me out with that. Your dude needs a little help. Aside from that, if you want to support the channel because you like what you see here and you just want to make sure that I can like pay my rent and stuff, then go on over to the Patreon link in the description, or just patreon.com/SBMTG. Easy to remember. $1 a month is all I ask. That supports the channel more than you could possibly understand. And it also allows you to vote on what you want to see first when Kaldheim comes out. You know, what decks and videos and top 10s and all that do you want me to do first? Affect the course of YouTube history. But aside from that, I guess I'm done for this one. So just let me know how you felt about the analysis and any cards and anything I didn't talk about. Interactions I missed, combos and whatnot. I read your comments, so get down there, get at me, and let me know. But aside from that, I guess we're done for the day, aren't we, Ziggy? Aren't we, Bobo? Oh, he's a sleepy boy. He's been so sleepy this whole time. But anyway, love you guys, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.